is the whole Baltimore thing. By the way, look what's happening with the Baltimore thing. Um, I see people volunteering to help in a variety of ways, but people don't really know what to do to help. So let me make a suggestion. I'm going to toss out a suggestion you haven't heard before, and it's radical. Now, I wouldn't suggest a radical idea to save the inner cities unless all of the normal ways had already been expired. Now, I have suggested, I think maybe yesterday, that one way would be to have some kind of a Switzerland-like consulting group come in and simply run a city for a while, or maybe only run the bidding process so that the money in the graft can be controlled without the city and any kind of potential for theft and bribery. So I've suggested that maybe there's something that's not regular politics that could come in for emergency situations. Now, I don't think that exists, but we need a government in a box. We need it for countries that are failing, just to get them up and running. And we need it in the United States for cities that are failing. You need a government in a box. Now, what I'd love to see is if the president could offer some kind of a emergency declaration option where the city can say, okay, we don't have to declare an emergency here, but if we do, we'll have some extra flexibility, extra resources. So if they do, then the federal government could work with them to deal with their problems in some effective way. But maybe they'd have more flexibility about what policies they can bend, what rules they can break, that sort of thing. Because sometimes you need to break some rules because the rules don't always keep up with the changing situation on the ground. So that's one way to do it. Let me give you an even more radical suggestion. How about we build a city to relocate people who are failing in their existing cities, failing specifically because of mental illness and drug addiction, just those two things. Suppose you built a separate city that was just for fixing those people. So let's say the housing is super cheap, but clean and good and respectable. So nobody's treated like a prison, right? It's a respectable but low income, low cost kind of place. Now, given that you're relocating people, you can put it anywhere. So you can put it on the cheapest land in the world. You can ship in all of your experts with all their best ideas and resources, and then it's all in one place. But most importantly, you would take these people out of their environments in which they are failing. If you keep a drug addict in the inner city, the odds of them getting clean are pretty low because they're in a horrible place, no resources to help them, there are drugs everywhere. It's just the best option. Might as well do some drugs. If you take them somewhere where they couldn't get drugs even if they tried, a whole extra city, somebody says Alcatraz, that's actually a really good idea, Alcatraz, because an island would be perfect, not as a prison. You'd have to get rid of the prison, but the idea of an island where people live who have the same set of problems and can't possibly work in the normal society and city, just move them. Now, somebody says it won't work, but you didn't give a reason. There's probably enough room in these comments that you could give a reason if you wanted to. Somebody's saying a leper colony. That's not a bad analogy. The point of a leper colony is if you took the lepers away from the normal population, you could concentrate, whatever medical help. You could keep them from infecting other people, and it made sense, and it worked. It actually worked. It seems to me that we should test out some of our new technologies for building homes. Could be 3D printed homes, could be these prefab homes, etc. Find a cheap place in the middle of nowhere where the land costs nothing and there's access to water, the basics, and just make it really hard to get any drugs in and out of there. You could probably do that. So I'll even go further. I think it has to happen because I think all of the other options for dealing with mental health and for drug addiction will be too little. Even if they're effective, they'll be too little. I think you have to relocate the people. Now, I have a little bit of experience, and not the good kind, in that most of you know the story. My stepson died less than a year ago from opioid overdose, and including fentanyl, which was probably the key ingredient. And there was nothing you could do once he reached 18. If he didn't want treatment, he didn't get it. And he was surrounded by temptations, and there was just nothing you could do. There was no force you could put on him, nothing. It was, he could not live in society the way it was organized. So putting that kid, he was 18 at the time, putting that 18-year-old in normal society doomed him. He could not function. It was beyond him. There are tons of people in that situation. They cannot function in a normal city, in a normal environment. So if you don't move them to a different environment, you're just waiting for them to die. And they're probably, at least some of them, are going to take other people with them. I know that when my stepson died, I had the worst set of feelings, which is, of course, the sadness for the tragedy, of course. But on top of that, I also knew that he wouldn't be able to hurt anybody else. And he would have. Not intentionally. He was a good kid in terms of, he was not bad by nature. So, but his lifestyle, I guaranteed it would have hurt somebody. And I think that, yeah, so there's no such thing as forced rehab, at least in most states, if not all. You can't force somebody into rehab. That has to happen. Now, you don't necessarily need to force people. If you could say, we've built this nice city. If you go there, you're going to have a much better time than where you are. Under those conditions, you might be able to get people to go voluntarily, and maybe enough of them. Because you don't have to eliminate crime and mental health problems from the inner cities to make a difference. You have to reduce it a lot until the existing systems can handle it. At the moment, they're overwhelmed. Too much mental health, too much addiction. There's no way that an inner city can function with that stuff going on. And then you add immigration on top of it for an extra burden. So I say the only way this will ever get solved is by separate cities for the addicted. Maybe you need yet another separate city for the people who have mental issues that they're trying to work through. And that is my positive suggestion. I would not respect any opinions that say you can't use a tragedy to talk about things that need to get done. Generally, when there's one of these gun shootings, there's always a cry for gun control. And then there are other people who say, how dare you bring up gun control during a tragedy, because that's not giving the victims enough respect to let them grieve and all that. Stop making it political. I completely disagree. If the problem is this dire, and the shootings are pretty darn dire, if the problem is this dire, you should bring it up any time. And if the time you bring it up is when most people are paying attention because something just happened, that's the best time to bring it up. Now, if you happen to be opposed to gun control, you don't want that side to win. But from a pure, rational, what's good for society, sort of generality, bringing up potential solutions when everybody has the emotional, let's say the emotional energy and the focus on the problem is exactly the time to do it. If that's offensive to some people, I think that's still a good trade-off. Likewise, if I've offended anybody here, I don't think I need to apologize to the outraged tourists who just like to feel offended, but it still was the best time to do it. Because next time there's a situation, people might say, hey, I'd like to get my story out. I think the public has a right to know. It's there's a use for it. I'll use this tool. I don't think that makes the world a worse place. But if you see my Twitter feed today, you certainly will think I made the world a worse place. So don't be like Mr. Bader and complain before you know all the facts. All right, that's all for now. Let's see if we can put our heads together and fix these inner city problems. We should, at the very least, we should be talking about tools and solutions, at the very least. All right, I will talk to you tomorrow.